My grandfather built a house with his own hands. He poured the foundation himself in the spring of 1988, worked the framing on weekends for 3 years, drove nails until his palms blistered and never once complained about it. The lake house in eastern Kentucky wasn't a second home or a vacation property. It was the first thing Raymond Calloway ever built that no one could take away from him. And he built it to last. My parents sold it to pay for my sister's wedding cake. Specifically, the gold flakes on top of it. What they didn't know, what they had never once thought to check, was that the house was already mine. Had been legally, irrevocably mine since I was 18 years old. I found out they'd listed it in February. I waited until April to say anything. I chose the engagement party. This is the story of what happens when a family spends 30 years deciding that one daughter is worth everything, and the other daughter is fine. I am the other daughter. And I was fine. Just not in the way they meant. My name is Mara. I'm 34 years old. I work in environmental compliance for a water management firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I live in a 1-bedroom apartment that I keep very clean. I iron my work shirts on Sunday evenings. I keep my receipts. I answer emails the same day I receive them. I'm telling you this not because it matters to the story exactly, but because it matters to understanding who I am, which is someone who learned early and without being explicitly taught that being useful was the only role available to me inside my family. So I got very good at it. I became the kind of person who finishes things, who follows through, who does not need to be reminded twice. I grew up in a house in rural Harlan County, Kentucky. My father, Douglas, owned a small quarry and aggregate supply business that my grandfather had helped him buy. My mother, Patricia, everyone called her Pat, worked 20 hours a week at a dental office and spent the other 140 hours of the week running a household, which in practice meant organizing other people's lives while managing the persistent feeling that her own life had somehow not yet begun. My sister Hannah came along 4 years after me in 2006. She was a happy, beautiful baby, and she became a happy, beautiful child, and then a happy, beautiful young woman who built a lifestyle brand on Instagram and referred to it as her business. She has 14,000 followers. He posts about gratitude. He means it. She just doesn't extend it in all directions equally. Hannah got a birthday party every year. She got dance classes at a private studio at $175 a month starting when she was 7. She got her mother's full attention at every meal, every performance, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She got called into the kitchen just to be looked at. She got told constantly and without ambiguity that she was exactly what this family had been waiting for. I got up early enough to make sure she was dressed before the school bus came. Because our mother was not a morning person and that had to be managed by someone. I am not telling you this looking for sympathy. I am telling you this because it is the foundation of everything that comes later. And if you don't understand what was normal in my house, you won't understand why it took me 30 years to pick up a phone and make 2 calls that ended it. Have you ever been in a situation where you could see very clearly that something was wrong, but every time you tried to name it, you became the problem? Where the injustice was so woven into the fabric of daily life that pointing at it felt like pointing at the air. That was my childhood. When I was 11, I was accepted into a competitive summer science program at the University of Kentucky. 48 students statewide. 6 weeks. The cost was $1,200. My father told me they couldn't swing it right now. That same month, Hannah was enrolled in a private dance academy at $175 a month. I did the math. I was 11. I understood it. And I also understood even then that saying what I'd calculated out loud would not produce the outcome I wanted. It would make me difficult. It would make me ungrateful. It would become a story about how hard my parents were working and how little I appreciated that, and the conversation would end with everyone's feelings sorted except mine. So I didn't say it. I filed it. I have been filing things my entire life, which is partly why I became good at compliance work. The documentation habit started young. The person who interrupted all of this, who inserted himself into my family's particular arrangement like a compass needle pointing stubbornly north, was my grandfather. Raymond Elias Calloway. Born 1963 in Harlan County to a coal miner's family, the third of 5 kids. His own father worked the same seam for 22 years and died at 54 of a lung condition. Raymond watched that happen, decided at 16 that he would build something that outlasted him, and then proceeded to spend the next 30 years actually doing it. He bought 12 acres of lake-adjacent land in 1988 with cash he had saved over 7 years of construction work. He built the house himself on weekends over 3 years, holding a foreman position during the week. His wife Dorothy used to drive out to the site in the evenings and bring their dinner in a covered pot. She'd sit with him in the half-finished rooms while he ate, and sometimes they'd talk and sometimes they'd just sit, watching the lake catch the last light through the open space where the windows would eventually go. Dorothy planted the orchard the first spring after they moved in. 12 Honeycrisp apple trees and 9 pear trees on the eastern acreage. She tended them until the Alzheimer's took enough of her that she couldn't find the orchard anymore, even though it was 30 feet from the back door. When I was 12, Dorothy's disease had progressed to the point where Raymond couldn't manage everything alone. My parents did not arrange for me to help. I arranged it myself. I started spending every other weekend at the lake house, cooking, driving Dorothy to appointments, sitting with her in the afternoons and reading aloud while she watched me with those eyes that still recognized kindness even when they'd stopped recognizing faces. My parents gave me gas money twice in the first year and then stopped. My father said Raymond preferred to handle things himself. Raymond had said no such thing. But what those weekends gave me, what they deposited in me, compound interest across 6 years, was the only place I ever felt like a person rather than a function. Raymond called me the compass. He said I always knew which direction was true. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I was much older. I think he was telling me that I had judgment and that judgment was something he trusted, and that being trusted for the right thing, not for your compliance, not for your usefulness, not for your willingness to absorb whatever the room needed, was a different kind of being seen. Dorothy died at the lake house in March of 2017. I was 15. I was the one who stayed on the phone with Raymond that night. 2 hours, maybe more. He didn't talk the whole time. Mostly we were just there together across the line. My father called briefly and said he couldn't talk anymore right now. He said it with the authentic exhaustion of someone who genuinely could not face it, and I believed him. And I also sat on my bedroom floor in Harlan County at midnight holding the phone against my ear until my grandfather's breathing steadied. I want to be fair to my father when I can. He loved his parents. He just loved them at a distance that protected him from having to be useful. I turned 18 in June of 2018. Raymond drove to pick me up on a Tuesday morning, a week after my birthday. He didn't tell me where we were going. He was quiet for most of the drive, the way he got quiet when he was preparing to say something he'd been carrying for a while. The office was on Commerce Street in Hazard, Kentucky. Whitmore and Associates. The waiting room smelled like coffee and old paper and the particular kind of air conditioning that runs in professional offices in July in the South. Too cold, too dry, faintly industrial. Gerald Whitmore was 64 years old, semi-retired even then. With reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose and a voice like someone who had spent 40 years being deliberately unhurried. Raymond sat across from me and watched me read the document. The Raymond E. Calloway Amended Revocable Living Trust. Amendment Number 2, dated June 14, 2016, with a beneficiary confirmation addendum prepared for my signature that day. What it said in the careful language of estate law that Gerald translated into plain terms while I was still on the first page was this: the lake house, the adjacent orchard, the surrounding 9.3 acres and the 1-acre shoreline parcel on the eastern edge of the property, all of it belonged to me. Not to my father. Not to my father's estate. Not to my family as a collective unit that might eventually vote on what to do with it. To me. Irrevocably. Filed with the Harlan County Clerk on July 3, 2016, and fully visible in any competent title search. The trust specified that the property could not be sold, transferred, mortgaged, or otherwise encumbered by any party other than Mara Elaine Calloway without her written, notarized consent. Any transaction purporting to transfer the property without that consent was legally void from inception. I looked up from the document. Raymond was watching me. I said, "Does Dad know?" Raymond said, "No." I said, "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am not punishing your father. I am protecting what I built. You are the only one I trust to protect it after I'm gone." That was it. No speech. No elaboration. Just the plain statement of a man who had spent years watching his son, and had come to a clear, practical conclusion, and had made arrangements accordingly. I signed the document. Gerald notarized it. Raymond gave me a cream-colored envelope with my name on the front in his handwriting and told me to open it only if the lake house ever became an issue. He told me what was inside. Instructions in the second and third paragraphs and something personal in the fourth. He said I'd know when the time came. I put both documents, the trust addendum and the sealed envelope, in a fireproof lockbox that I kept under my bed when I got home. I have checked that they are still there 14 times since that day in Gerald Whitmore's office. I know that number because I wrote it down each time. Raymond died in April of 2021. Heart failure at home at the lake house, in the chair he'd built himself on the front porch. He was 58 years old. I drove back to Columbus after the funeral. I sat in my car outside my apartment building for 40 minutes before I could go inside. No one at the service had asked me what I was feeling. My father handled the practical arrangements. My mother brought a casserole. Hannah posted a black and white photo of Raymond on Instagram with a candle emoji. From 2021 to 2024, my parents never once asked me what my grandfather had left me. They assumed they knew. They had his general estate, divided per his will between my father and a small charitable bequest to a local 4-H program. They never thought to ask whether there was anything else. They were wrong. My father's business had been failing quietly for most of my childhood. 3 bad equipment investments over 10 years. Credit extended to clients who never paid. A refusal to ask for outside help that he called stubbornness but was actually the particular kind of terror that lives in men who've been handed an opportunity they can't afford to admit they mismanaged. By the end of 2024, Douglas Calloway owed $340,000 across 2 business loans and a personal guarantee on the second one. He had told my mother the number was $180,000. He had not mentioned the personal guarantee at all. My mother, meanwhile, had been waiting 11 years to renovate her kitchen. I want to say this clearly. The kitchen renovation wasn't vanity, exactly. Or it wasn't only vanity. It was 30 years of running a house and raising 2 daughters and working part-time and managing the gap between the life she'd imagined and the life she actually had, compressed into a single achievable thing. Quartz countertops. A farmhouse sink. A 6-burner range. She brought it up at Christmas dinners. She referenced it when she was angry. She had already promised a contractor. In her mind, she deserved it, and the word deserve in her vocabulary carried the weight of a long, uncelebrated service record. And then Hannah got engaged. November of 2024. Brett Osgood, 33, pharmaceutical sales. Affable, largely absent in the way of men who find it easier to let things happen around them than to be present in them. He's not a bad person. He is a person who didn't ask enough questions, and that is a different thing. My mother and Hannah built the wedding budget together over 2 evenings in December. They had a spreadsheet my mother had printed from a wedding website. They texted each other photos of centerpieces for 3 days afterward, my mother told me later. Back when she was still telling me things. The final number was $143,000. My mother told Hannah they were rounding to 150 for the unexpected. The line items included a restored barn venue for 220 guests, $32,000 in catering, $14,000 in florals, an Amalfi Coast honeymoon for $18,000, and a gold flake wedding cake made by a baker being brought in from Lexington for $4,200. The gold flake cake had been Hannah's specific non-negotiable request. She'd seen it on a London wedding blog and texted my mother a photo with the caption, "This is what I want. This is it." My mother said yes before she'd even asked the price. My father, looking at $340,000 in debt and a $150,000 wedding and his wife's $34,000 kitchen renovation, made a decision. He would sell the lake house. He did not consult an attorney. He did not request a title search. He called Linda Beaumont at Beaumont Properties, a real estate agent he knew socially, and told her the property was in the family estate and they were ready to sell. He told her a number around $350 to $400, which was already below market but which was the number he wanted to control. He signed a listing agreement. He told my mother. He told Hannah. He told everyone. I would later find out that the whole family was on board. He told himself I would understand. That I always understood. I found out from Thomas Calloway, my father's second cousin, Raymond's side of the family, sent me a text on a Saturday in February at 11 in the morning. I was at my kitchen table in Columbus with a second cup of coffee and a work report I was trying to finish before noon. The text said, "Hey Mara, random question, is your grandfather's lake house being sold? I think I just saw it listed on Beaumont's website. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't looking at the wrong property." He thought it was a mistake. That's how he phrased it. Just wanted to make sure. I set down my coffee. I read the text twice. Then I opened a browser and typed Linda Beaumont's agency name into the search bar. And there it was. The property address in Harlan County, listed at $415,000, with photographs I recognized. The front porch. The orchard through the back window. The screened addition my grandfather built in 2003. The lake in the background of the wide-angle shot, still and gray in the February light. I did not call my parents. I called Gerald Whitmore. He answered on the third ring, and when I told him what I was looking at, there was a pause and then the particular kind of sigh that a careful man makes when something he prepared for has finally arrived. He told me what I already knew but needed confirmed out loud. The trust was intact, the amendment was recorded, the listing was legally void, and the sale could not close. Any title search at closing would flag the amendment immediately. The property was mine. It had always been mine. My father had listed something he did not own. Then Gerald said, "Mara, what do you want to do about it?" I thought about that for a long moment. I asked him what my options were. He listed them. I listened to all of them. Then I called a property attorney in Columbus, Sarah Adeyemi and Park LLP, and she confirmed everything Gerald had said and outlined the same set of options. I chose silence. Let me explain why. Because people ask me this when I tell this story. They ask why I didn't pick up the phone and call my parents immediately, why I waited 2 months, whether I was being manipulative or cruel or whether I was punishing people who were already in trouble. I chose silence because I had spent 32 years watching what happened when I named things directly in my family. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. My mother would cry and redirect. My father would exhale and reframe. The listing would be quietly withdrawn. Nothing would be acknowledged. No one would say, "We were going to sell your property without telling you." They would say, "There was a misunderstanding." They would say, "We thought you'd want to help." And then 3 years later or 5 something else would happen. Because that's the thing about a pattern. It doesn't stop when you point at it. It just moves somewhere you're not pointing. I needed them to commit to the story. Fully. I watched Hannah's Instagram post go up on February 3rd. Big things coming for this family. We finally get everything we deserve. So grateful. I screenshotted it. I created a folder on my phone and labeled it. I watched my mother post kitchen renovation samples on Facebook with the caption, "Starting to feel like our home is finally becoming what it was always supposed to be. Long time coming." I read it 3 times. I saved it. One Saturday in March I drove past the lake house. I didn't stop. I just slowed down on the road that runs along the property line and looked at the orchard through my windshield. The trees were still bare, early spring, not yet leafed out, just those dark crooked branches against a white-gray sky. The beehive at the northern edge, exactly where Raymond had placed it in 2009. The front porch empty. The chair he'd built still there. I needed to see it. I needed to remind myself what I was protecting. The engagement party invitation arrived in late March. Saturday, April 26th. The Callaway family home, Harlan County, Kentucky. Hosted by Douglas and Patricia Callaway in honor of Hannah and Brett. RSVP requested by April 15th. I responded yes. I drove down from Columbus on the afternoon of April 26th. The drive is about 2.5 hours. Flat Ohio highway for the first 90 minutes. Then the land starts to shift and fold into the Kentucky hills. The green deepening, the road narrowing, the sky getting closer. I've made that drive more times than I can count. It has always felt like re-entering something I never entirely left. I texted Thomas when I crossed into Harlan County. He wrote back, "I'll be there. I'll stand near the back." That was all. My parents had transformed the backyard. String lights stretched between the trees in long parallel rows, warm and close in the April evening. There were catered appetizers on long tables, small white plates and silver tongs. A photo wall near the French doors. Hannah and Brett across the years, the progression of a relationship documented in rectangles, all of it beautiful, all of it curated in the way that Hannah curated everything. And in the center of the dessert table, a miniature version of the planned wedding cake. 3 tiers, white fondant and edible gold flake pressed into every surface. My mother had ordered it specifically. He was proud of it. I could see that from across the backyard. The way she stood near the table when guests moved toward it. The way she tilted her head slightly when someone commented on it. I hugged Hannah when I arrived. I shook Brett's hand. I brought a gift. A good one, something I'd actually thought about. My mother kissed my cheek and said with a relief in her voice that was just slightly too visible, "I'm so glad you came, Mara." I noticed the relief. I filed it. 55 people moved through that backyard in the warm spring evening. The string lights made everyone's faces soft and golden. Somewhere behind the house, someone was playing music at a low volume. Something without words, just enough to fill the spaces in conversation. At 7:45, my father made his toast. He stood at the center of the yard with a wine glass raised and his voice set at the particular pitch of a man performing warmth rather than feeling it. He talked about Hannah's beauty, about Brett's character, about what this family was building together. He used the phrase fresh start twice. He said Raymond would have been so proud to see this day. He did not look at me once during the toast. I watched him not look at me and I noted it and I let it go. By 8 o'clock the appetizers were mostly gone and the conversations had settled into their smaller configurations. The clusters that form at family events when people have exhausted the general topics and retreated to the ones they can manage. My mother was near the dessert table with my Aunt Carol and my mother's friend Diane. My great-aunt Ruth Calloway Meeks, 78 years old, Raymond's younger sister, was standing near the back fence with a glass of white wine. Thomas was beside the garage. Brett's mother Eleanor was in conversation with someone near the house, her posture gracious and entirely composed. At 8:10 my mother gestured to the miniature cake. She was talking to Carol and Diane, but her voice carried, the way voices always carry at outdoor parties when the ambient noise drops between songs. She said, "The real one is going to be even more extraordinary. Raymond would have wanted this for Hannah." She said Raymond's name. I set down my glass. I crossed the backyard. I didn't move fast. I moved at the pace of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and recognizes it when it arrives. I stopped a few feet from my mother, close enough to be heard by the small cluster around her, and I said, in a tone I would describe as almost conversational, "Mom, I actually want to talk about Raymond and the lake house. I think now is a good time." My mother's face went through three things in about 2 seconds. The first was surprise. The second was the beginning of the redirect. I could see her drawing breath to manage this, to soften it, to move it somewhere private. The third was something underneath both of those, something older and quieter, that I think was the recognition that this time the redirect wasn't going to work. My father had moved closer when he heard my voice. He was standing about 6 feet away. I didn't look at him yet. I said, "My grandfather left the lake house to me. Not to the family. Not to Dad. To me specifically. He did it in a trust amendment signed in 2016 and recorded with the Harlan County Clerk on July 3rd of that year. I was 18 when I signed the beneficiary confirmation. That was June 9th of 2018. The attorney was Gerald Whitmore at Whitmore and Associates on Commerce Street in Hazard. If anyone wants to verify that, Gerald is 71 years old and semi-retired and still practicing, and he remembers me from that day. I could feel the yard changing. The conversations around us hadn't stopped yet, but they were slowing. The way sound changes when a room begins paying attention to something it doesn't fully understand. In February, I continued, I received a text from a family member who had seen the property listed for sale on Beaumont Properties website. I was not told about this listing. I was not consulted. My father told the real estate agent and apparently also told everyone here tonight that the whole family was on board with the sale. I was not asked. I would not have agreed. And it doesn't matter legally whether I agreed or not. The property cannot be transferred without my written, notarized consent. Any closing would have been voided immediately by a title search. I've been in contact with an attorney since February, and I've filed a formal notice with the county clerk's office. The yard was quiet now. Fully quiet. 55 people either watching or pretending very hard not to. I reached into my bag and took out the document envelope. Cream-colored, Gerald Whitmore's address printed in the upper left corner, and I set it on the dessert table. Not slammed. Set down. Next to the gold flake cake. Then I turned to my sister. Hannah was standing about 8 feet away. Her face had moved through shock and arrived somewhere that was trying to reassemble itself into a question. Brett was beside her, his hand on her arm, his expression carefully neutral. I said, "I want you to have a beautiful wedding, Hannah. I genuinely do. But it can't be paid for with a house our grandfather built with his hands and left to me. That was never on the table. It was never going to be on the table," Hannah said, and her voice was not angry, it was genuinely confused, which was almost harder. "What do you mean it was left to you? Dad said we all agreed. He said, "Dad, you said." He turned to my father. Douglas Calloway opened his mouth. He stood there in front of 55 people in his own backyard, with the string lights warm above him and the dessert table to his left and the document envelope sitting next to his daughter's gold flake cake. And he opened his mouth and he could not produce a single word. He closed it. He opened it again. Nothing. My Aunt Carol Sorrento, my mother's sister, looked at my mother. Then she looked away. Brett's mother Eleanor set down her glass on the nearest table. Quietly. With the precision of someone who has just understood the full shape of an evening. My great-aunt Ruth at the back fence did not say a word. She didn't have to. She had known Raymond Calloway her entire life, and she had known for years what he thought of how his son had turned out, and she was standing in that backyard the way a fact stands in a room, present, unargued, simply there. My mother was crying. Not the cry of remorse. That would come later, maybe. This was the cry of a woman whose carefully maintained narrative has just collapsed in front of everyone she uses to maintain it. And she is reaching desperately for a new one, and she cannot find it yet. I did not comfort her. I am aware of how that sounds. I had comforted her at the expense of myself for 32 years. I was done. The party didn't end dramatically. There were no scenes, no shouting matches, no moments of televised confrontation. People simply found reasons to leave. The conversations restarted in lower registers and then finished. Plates were abandoned. Glasses set down. Small, quiet departures one after another, until the backyard had mostly emptied and the string lights were strung over nothing in particular. I left when it felt right to leave. I drove back to Columbus that night, Kentucky hills, then flat Ohio highway, then the familiar grid of the city at 1 a.m. with the streets wet from a rain that had moved through while I was in Harlan County. I parked outside my building. I sat in the car. I did not cry. I thought about what Raymond had said in that office on Commerce Street in Hazard, Kentucky 16 years ago. I am not punishing your father. I am protecting what I built. I thought, the house is still standing. In the weeks after the engagement party, things moved the way legal things move, steadily, without drama, with the particular inevitability of documented facts. My attorney's communications to Linda Beaumont and the county clerk required the listing to be formally withdrawn. Any pending sale documentation was voided. Linda Beaumont received a formal complaint filed with the Kentucky Real Estate Commission, not out of vindictiveness, but because she had proceeded with a listing without conducting a title search, and that had consequences. The complaint resulted in a mandatory professional education requirement and a notation on her license. She didn't lose it. She became considerably more careful. My father lost the business formally in June. During the course of the legal correspondence surrounding the property dispute, documents surfaced that my mother had not seen before. She discovered, not from my father but from attorney paperwork, that the actual debt was $340,000. She also discovered the personal guarantee. I don't know exactly what happened in their house after that. I know that Thomas called me in June and said things were very quiet over there. I know that my father took a salaried position at a regional supply company in August, $52,000 a year, operations management. I know he did not call me. Not once. My mother called 3 times in May. I let the first 2 calls go to voicemail. She said both times that she wanted to explain. I listened to the messages and sat with them and thought about what explaining would actually mean. What version of events she was preparing to offer me that would make what had happened make sense. I answered the 3rd call. She said, "I want you to understand that we didn't think." I said, "Mom." And I waited. She was quiet. I said, "I know exactly what you thought. You thought I would understand because I always understood. You thought the property was available because you never asked whether it was. And you thought it was okay to tell everyone the family had agreed because you've been telling a version of things that isn't true for a very long time, and it has mostly worked. I understand all of it. I'm not angry about it anymore. But I don't need an explanation. I need you to know that I know, not the version you're going to offer me but the actual version. That's all. She started to say something and then stopped. I said, I wish you well, Mom. I genuinely do. I meant it. That's the part people have trouble believing, but it's true. I do not wish my mother suffering. I wish her the clarity to look at things she has been avoiding, and I wish her the courage to let that clarity change something. Whether that happens is not mine to determine. She started therapy in the fall. Not from an epiphany. I don't think epiphanies are how my mother works. I think she started because she finally had enough stillness in her house to hear something she'd been successfully outrunning for years. Whether that produces change is a question I don't have the answer to. Some doors open late. Some don't open at all. Hannah's wedding happened 14 months later, in June of the following year. Brett had said to her quietly in the days after the engagement party, "We're going to do this ourselves. Our budget, our wedding. That's it." I heard this from Thomas, who heard it from Eleanor Osgood, Brett's mother. Hannah resisted for a few weeks. She had been planning a specific event, a specific version of a day she had been imagining since before she could have articulated why she was imagining it, and being asked to release that was real grief, even if the grief was tangled up in other things that were harder to name. But Brett didn't move. And her parents had nothing to offer her. So she rebuilt the plans. The wedding was 80 guests. A local venue, not the barn. A sit-down dinner, nothing catered from Lexington. A simple 3-tiered cake from a bakery in town. White fondant, no gold flake. By every account I heard, it was beautiful. The photos were beautiful. Hannah was beautiful. She posted less during the planning process than she had the first time. Whether that's shame or growth, I genuinely cannot tell from the outside, and I am trying to have enough grace not to need to determine which it is. She didn't call me for 6 months after the engagement party. When she finally did on a Sunday evening in October, she didn't apologize. Not directly. What she did was ask questions, which was something she had never done before. Not about me, not genuinely. She said, "Did you always know? About the trust, did you know the whole time we were growing up?" I said, "I knew from the time I was 18. She was quiet. Then, "How long did you know that they were trying to sell it?" "Since February." Another silence. Then, "Why didn't you ever tell me what it was like? Growing up. Why didn't you ever say something?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "Because you would have told Mom, and then there would have been a conversation about how I was making things difficult and nothing would have changed. And you believed what they told you about me. It was easier for everyone, including you." She didn't argue with that. She sat with it on her end of the line. I could hear her breathing. She said, "I didn't know they were using your property, Mara. I want you to know that." I said, "I know. And I didn't know." She stopped. Started again. "I think I didn't ask enough questions. About a lot of things." Those are the right questions, I thought. These are the right sentences. They are a beginning, not a resolution. A beginning is not nothing. We don't talk every week. We don't have the easy warmth of sisters who grew up knowing each other clearly. We are building something from a foundation that was not properly laid, and that is slower work than either of us probably would have wanted. But she asks questions now. Real ones. That counts for something. On a Sunday in May, after the listing was withdrawn, after the last document was filed, after the legal correspondence had finished and the dust had settled into the new shape of things, I drove back to the lake house alone. I parked where Raymond always parked, at the edge of the gravel where the grass starts. I sat in the car for a minute, listening to the engine cool, looking at the front porch. The chair he built was still there. It would probably outlast most things. I walked the orchard first. Dorothy's trees, her Honeycrisps in the western end, her pear trees to the east, just coming into full leaf in late May, the new growth bright and almost yellow-green against the older wood. The bees were working the flowering branches that still held their last blooms. Raymond had put that hive in 2009, and I had tended it each spring, and the bees did not care about any of what had happened in the past few months. They were doing what bees do, which is make something from what's available and never question whether they have the right. I went to the porch. I sat in Raymond's chair. The lake was visible at the far eastern edge of the property, flat and still in the late morning light. I sat there for a long time. Then I went inside. I made tea in Dorothy's pot, the same ceramic pot she'd used every morning of her adult life, the glaze worn on the handle where her thumb had rested. I sat at the kitchen table, and I took out the sealed envelope. I had read the letter many times. I had it memorized, but I read it again. The fourth paragraph, the personal one, is not something I'm going to recite to you word for word, because it belongs to me in a way that very few things in my life have belonged specifically to me. What I'll tell you is what it said in effect. Raymond told me he saw me. Not what I could do, not how useful I was, not what the family would need from me when he was gone. He saw me, the specific person sitting across the kitchen table from him at 12 years old, doing homework without being asked, absorbing things without complaining, carrying things without putting them down. He said he had watched me for years and had known something about me that he wasn't sure I knew about myself yet. He said the compass metaphor wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation. He said a compass doesn't choose to point north. It's built that way. He said that for most of my life the people around me had taken advantage of that quality, had relied on it, had counted on me pointing north so they didn't have to. He said, the house is the least of what I'm leaving you. What I'm leaving you is the fact that I knew. I am putting it on paper so you have something to hold when everything else tries to tell you otherwise. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I set it on the table next to Dorothy's pot and the mug of tea I'd made. Outside the kitchen window, the orchard. Late spring light on the apple trees. The lake at the far edge, still and deeply itself. The hardest thing I have ever had to learn is the difference between forgiveness and acceptance. Forgiving my parents does not mean pretending that what they did was something other than what it was. It was theft or the attempt at it. Of property, yes, but also of a narrative, of history, of the version of events in which I was a willing participant in my own deprioritization. Forgiveness means I am choosing consciously not to carry what happened as an active wound. It means I am putting it down. Not because they deserve that from me, but because I don't want to spend the rest of my life using energy I could use for other things. Acceptance is different. Acceptance means understanding that my parents are exactly who they showed me they were across 32 years of consistent demonstration. My grandfather understood this about his son before I was born. He didn't try to change it. He made arrangements that meant it couldn't reach what he'd built. I am not fine in the way my family always assumed I was fine. I am fine in the way you become fine when you stop waiting for the people who hurt you to be the ones who heal you. You realize, eventually, that waiting is a form of staying inside the system. You realize that the system does not have a protocol for your recovery. So you build one yourself. You find your documents. You make your calls. You choose your moment. My grandfather called me the compass. He said I always knew which direction was true. I think about the people in your life who saw you that way. Not what you were useful for, not what role you filled, but the actual person underneath all of that. The one who looked at you before you had anything to offer and just saw you. If you had someone like that, I think you know exactly what I mean. And if you didn't, I think you know what that cost too. And I think you found your own way to point north anyway. Tell me in the comments. I want to know. My grandfather built a house with his own hands. He built it to last and he left it to the person he trusted to keep it standing. It's still standing. I'll be there this weekend. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you've been carrying or something you've finally put down, this channel exists for exactly that. Every story here is about quiet people who waited and documented and then showed up. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.